Now that we got the bills paid, let's talk about our guests today. Let's start off with the accolades and then we'll bring them on. And really, this will get across why you should care. Aside from being an Eisner-nominated writer, Heidi MacDonald is the editor-in-chief of the comics industry news blog, The Beat, aka Comics Beat. It's the news blog of comics culture. It's an award-winning website that has lived up to its name since launching in 2004. And it's been such a staple to the industry that it was added to the Library of Congress's historical archives in 2017, and named one of the 25 best blogs by Time magazine. Comics Beat aside, Heidi has edited comics for Disney, DC Comics, Vertigo, HarperCollins, and Z2 on titles such as The Lion King, Scooby-Doo, Gargoyles, Swamp Thing, and Why the Last Man. She's also served as an editor and writer at Publishers Weekly for a very long stint, and you can still hear her every week on the Publisher Weekly Comics World More to Come podcast. And if you're a fan of comic art and history and artist spotlights, I highly recommend finding yourself a copy of her book, Secret Teachings of a Comic Book Master, The Art of Alfredo Alcala. Shortbox Nation, without further ado, let's welcome Heidi MacDonald to the show. Heidi, welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks, Badr. Thanks for having me on. Wow. Thanks, everyone. Not accustomed to hearing such accolades. So many accolades. So I'm an accolade in my own mind.
Heidi, by the time this episode will come out to the public, it'll be Wednesday, November 22nd, which is, local comic shop day. And I know you're based out of New York, so the options are plentiful for you when it comes to like awesome comic shops. But what comic shop do you call home? Like, where does your pull list reside at?
Well, I just lost my local, which was JHU.
Oh, no.
Sort of getting in with the gloom and doom. And, that was definitely a gloom and doom moment, certainly for me. And I mean, it was right up the street from where I lived. I mean, in my neighborhood of Kips Bay. And I'm great friends with Ron Hill and Nick Purpura, who ran the store. So I was very sad to leave them. So I haven't actually had to go buy comics since then. But I guess when I do go, I will go to Midtown because it is the closest to me. Although I was walking by Forbidden Planet the other night, or actually last night, over on Broadway, and I was like, "Oh, I haven't been in there." So I don't know. I guess I'm, playing comic shop Tinder right now. Like I'm not sure, who I'm going to end up with.
You're a comic shop free agent. That's good.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but I mean, listen, you're right. I mean, all of the stores are fantastic. I love the guys at Forbidden Planet. I love Midtown. I wish I was closer to Anyone Comics over in Queens. It's a little far afield. I'm not going to go to another borough to get my comics. There's quite a robust comic shop culture still here in New York City. So yes, I'm very blessed by that.
And what does your pull list look like? Like, what is Heidi MacDonald picking up?
Well, I don't have a pull list because, I'm a journalist and I get all the watermarked PDFs.
Talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I ran out of room for physical comics a long time ago. I just have no room for them whatsoever. And, there are a lot more comics being published now, not necessarily periodical comics, but graphic novels.
Oh, yeah.
And I get a lot of those in the mail. And, I do live in a small New York apartment. And, the stately Beat Manor is a metaphorical, sadly. And,
space is a priority. Yeah,
there is. So I'm very, very happy that we have digital comics right now. So, but I'll be honest, I read mostly graphic novels, and I'm not really I don't read a lot of periodicals. I read them when called upon for news writing purposes. But I prefer to have the big, satisfying chunk.
What would you say was the last, if you don't mind me asking, what was the last couple of graphic novels that you've read recently that like really left an impression on you?
Oh boy,
I know it's putting you on the spot.
It is putting me on the spot. Well, I was reading, I'm going to have to look up the title because
that's fine.
There's so much information that goes through my mind.
Yeah, no, take your time. This isn't live at all.
Yes. Okay, that's right. Well, okay. I was reading Come Home India by Jim Terry. This was a little while ago, but it's such a good book. It's a autobiography, but it's just so well done and just so atmospheric and really I don't know. I just really connected with it. And, just recently, I mean, I put this up on my Instagram, so it really is. Um, but, I gave some books to a child, and the child, 6-year-old child, the 6-year-old child was very captivated by comics, and she's quite precocious. So it was like, I never read a graphic novel before.
Huh.
She actually said that, but I read her Kitty Sweet Tooth, and she loved it. And I really, it's written by a very good friend of mine, Abby Denson. I will throw that in there with art by Uda Maru, who's a Japanese artist. But it was really great to see it through the eyes of a child. And I started reading comics when I was a very small kid, and just became captivated. And it was really nice to see this child become captivated by them again. So, and I will say this: I don't have enough time to read comics. I'm so busy writing about them and trying to save the industry. I need to. Yeah, I need to. I'm halfway through. Again, let me make sure I get the name right, because I'm halfway through the new Jillian Tamaki, Mariko Tamaki roaming. I need to finish it. It's by Drawn and Quarterly, and it's about 3 girls who come to New York City for the first time, and they learn a lot of lessons. So I had a lot to relate to, but I just love the Tamakis. They're just so great. I mean, I say Tamakis, they are cousins, but you can say the Tamakis, but they are just geniuses. Mariko is, she won the Best Writer Eisner Award a few years ago, very richly deserved. And Jillian is an incredible storyteller. So really, really good stuff.
On the topic of graphic novels, I'm kind of in this, not the same boat, but a similar boat where I spend more time talking about comics and doing the interviews and the podcast that it really is a challenge to find time to like read as much as I used to when I was like, not doing the podcast or whatnot. But I do find that whenever I do have time, usually late at night, when I'm in bed and I just need to wind down, I'll tend to go towards graphic novels because I know there's a finish and an end, and I guess the diversity and range and topics and categories and genres that you get out of graphic novels have really been on point lately. Like especially in the nonfiction or autobiographical side, like the Miles Davis graphic novel that just came out. I've got that on my reading queue, but I'm currently reading like this Michael Jordan nonfiction graphic novel that came out. I don't got the name here in front of me, but those have really started to pique my interest. Are those type of offerings, maybe outside of like, the usual capes and cows that I'm accustomed to reading?
Well, there's a lot of really great biographical comics out there. There's also a lot of mediocre biographical comics out there.
Territory, right?
Well, the thing is that probably about 10 years ago, I'd say, within the past 10 years, comics became much more acceptable for educational purposes, so that they were used in school curriculums for middle grade and on up. And so publishers started doing a lot more biographies because there was more, they had the secondary educational market for them. And the funny thing is that so many of them are European. So I think that Michael Jordan one you're talking about is French, right?
You know what? I think you might be on to. Let me try to pull it up while I can. Yep. Well, no, that's not it. What the hell? Sorry. Here, let me try this. Michael Jordan comic. How about that? Okay, there it is. It's called Michael Jordan: Bull on Parade by Santiago by Wilfred Santiago.
Oh, Wilfred Santiago. Yes. He's I think he's a Spanish artist, I believe, but he is published mostly in France. So, I interviewed him a few years ago at somewhere. I'm sorry. It just, I remember people, but not places necessarily.
I'm not holding anything against you. You've been in this industry for 20 plus years. I can only imagine like the names and faces rattling around in your head. And I gotta go ahead.
No, go on.
Well, I was gonna say that I was looking at the Comics Beat website, and it's got you credited for 8,872 posts to your name. And how many articles would you say How many articles would you say that you've written, not just for the Beat, but maybe just like a ballpark number in total about comics? Like, do you have a
Well,
number in your head?
well, I'll tell you. I don't know if that was. I actually have 2 logins on the Beat,
Oh,
so that
wow.
was probably my most recent one. So there's probably another 8,000 on the other one,
Holy moly.
because I had to switch halfway through because of
Hmm.
various reasons. So yeah, it's in 5 digits. Yeah,
Wow.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've written most of my articles for the Beat, but I've written quite a few for other places. So I thousands,
Hmm.
thousands of articles. I mean, I'm constantly Googling something, and then the only thing that comes up was what I wrote. So, which is a
Hmm.
really,
It's like a
at
good
first you're
problem to
like,
have.
That's awesome. And then you're like, oh no, where do I look this up? So, yeah, but yes, I've written, and I believe me, I do not remember. Sometimes I'll go back and I was like,
Hmm.
I wrote that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So,
How often do you ever like revisit old stuff, or are you at a point in your career where it's like always forward, on to the next
no,
thing?
I
I'm
mean,
busy.
I do read some of my old things to make sure I'm not repeating myself, because
Hmm.
there tend to be certain topics that come up over and over again. I do have my own little anecdotes that I know that I rely on quite a bit, and I repeat them over and over because
Hmm.
they're like the primal scene for me. They're just like these moments when it all crystallized, and it doesn't need to really go beyond that in my mind. But so I have to, I try to make sure I don't repeat exactly. But I do find I'm quite consistent, Badr. I do find that if I was thinking of something, I find that I probably hit on the same point,
Yeah.
the last 10 years ago when I wrote about it.
Uh, I guess when you consider like and this might be even putting you on the spotlight even bigger or even a bigger ask, but when you consider like your career and all of the interviews and the articles that you've written, are there any that might stand maybe a few inches taller than the rest? Like if you had to make a Heidi MacDonald, Mount Rushmore of your journalistic highlights, like what are some where does your mind like immediately go?
Well, that's a great question. And you separate them into 2 categories.
Hmm.
There's the ones where you would just like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm talking to this person, right?
Hmm.
And then there's the one where you're like, I really did a good job on that. And I haven't made a fearless inventory of whether there's any crossover there, which there could be, but I will say that um, my favorite interview of all time was actually for the podcast, and it was with William Gibson,
Hmm.
the science fiction author, who's my favorite living author. And so just to get to interview him was like incredible. And it was also just when Pokemon Go had been released.
Oh
So I
wow.
got to ask him about that. And, talking about Pokemon Go with a guy who wrote
Yeah.
Neuromancer is pretty much as good as it gets, right?
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Right. So that was definitely the funny thing is it was at San Diego Comic-Con. So I believe earlier in the day I had breakfast with Margaret Atwood. And so it was quite a day. It was really a hell of a day. And that could only happen at San Diego Comic-Con, really.
Hmm.
What is my best interview? Well, a lot of times they're newsy ones where I get the first crack at somebody with some breaking news. There was one recently with the people who did Behind Distillery, which is a new publisher. But I mean, people,
Yeah.
they're friends. I mean, it's hard for me not to have a personal relationship with people in the industry, just because I've been doing it for so long, and you just see the same people over and over again, right?
Yeah.
So, but anyway, Chip Mosier and David Steinberger, I thought that was a good interview because a lot of people quoted it. I had an interview with Axel Alonso when he first got the job at Marvel as editor in chief.
Oh wow.
And, we had worked together at Vertigo, so we were friends. And I had, requested, could I interview him? They're like, okay, sure. You could do the intro, the debut interview, right? And I do believe that is the only time he was ever interviewed
Oh wow,
as
really?
editor in chief. Like he did like, Axel's axe to
Mhm.
grind or
The in-house
whatever. I
stuff,
made
yeah.
that up, by the way. He did like some writing for
Sounded good.
CBR, and he right, and then he did some other interviews, but they're more like, what's coming up in this new reboot or whatever. I think it was the only time he did an interview that he was just like answering questions. And I do notice that it's cited on Wikipedia quite a bit, just because it was the only one that he did. So that was really, a great opportunity to talk to him. And I think when I first started doing the beat 20 years ago, I did some really good interviews with people like Eddie Campbell and Dan Clowes and Gilbert Hernandez, and just some of my favorite cartoonists. So I guess I'll just say one more, because it's interesting. Please. I've never, way back in the day, I did a very long interview with George Perez for the spotlight on him that Fantagraphics published. And I mean, I didn't even know what I was doing. If I were to read this, I would just die of embarrassment, I'm sure. And, I sat there and quizzed him for like 2 hours, and I was just like a kid who didn't know anything. But, a lot of people have said they really enjoyed that interview, or they, a lot of people have read that book and enjoyed the book. So I hope I did my job, and I hope I did right by George. I wish I had been able to do another interview with him, before, sadly he passed away, but, I'd never got the chance. So at least I got that chance to do it that one time.
Do you have a do you have like a white whale interview that you're still after? Is there someone in the industry, whether it be comics or just like pop culture and writing in general, that you're still like, when I get that, I'm good? That's the one.
Oh wow, yeah.
Because I imagine that list has got to be short, considering how long you've been doing this. Like, it's got to be a short list.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Okay. Well, there's a couple.
Oh, please give it to me. Come
on. Well, the one is this again. It's like, who would I nerd out over, and then who would I really love to just sit down and talk shop with. So the first is like just Carl Urban, because I love Carl Urban. I'll just say that.
Good one.
Right. Come on. And I mean, he is also, I've seen him talk, he comes to all the cons. He's so charming. He's so funny. Everybody, he's been drinking with my friends. He is definitely a legend. And and then when The Boys first came out, there was supposed to be a junket that I was supposed to go to, and I never got to go to it. So I'm waiting for that chance to come back. But I'm sure it will happen, because it just does. These things all come around. One of the great white whales that I wanted to talk to was way back in the day when I worked for Disney Adventures, and that was Jackie Chan. So that was, really great. So as far as comics industry people that I would really like to sit down and talk to, I guess Urasawa would be, or Junji Ito, right?
Oh my god!
Now,
fantastic choices.
Naoki Urasawa, but it's hard because of the language barrier to have a really spontaneous conversation when there's a big language difference. I did interview Mayako Ano, who is a mangaka. She's married to, I'm going to mess up his name. He's the guy who did Neon Genesis and Evangelion. So they're like this, like Travis and Taylor of comics, of manga, anime. I got to interview her, and that was really incredible. So, but as far as in English, who would I like to interview? Boy, I don't know. That's a really great question. I'd love to. I tell you, if you're listening, he's not. But I'll tell you who I'd like to interview right now is Mark Miller from Millar. Right?
I can imagine why. I think it ties into a big reason why I had you on. But
listen, I know Mark quite well. We've been known each other for a long time. In fact, there was one night at a con where me, Mark, Alex Ross, and one other comics journalist sat there and talked for like an hour. It was just like the end of the night. The bar was closed. And we just sat there and shot the breeze for like an hour. It was amazing. I wish I remembered more of that conversation. I would love to talk to Mark Miller now, because he obviously has a lot to say. And I'm not saying I disagree. Actually, he has some. Mark's super smart and has some really great points. So it wouldn't even be like, how could you possibly think Robert F. Kennedy is sane? Because he's not, obviously. But I mean, Mark had one of those great moments that I've actually quoted many, many times in my work, is when he told me that it's only when people are desperate in comics that they really innovate, and which is true in all media. So I think we're reaching that point. So Mark actually has some very, very very insightful comments to make about comics, and so I think it would be a lively conversation.
I'm here for all of that, and you know what? Hopefully, Mark Millar is listening. All right, Heidi, it sounds like you look back. Well, I'm sorry, let's step back. Do you miss the days of being an editor in chief and being on that side of comics? Because it sounds like just the before we even got started, you were mentioning talking to Greg Weisman prior to this, and even you brought up a few times the different titles you've worked on in the past. Like, do you miss being an editor in chief in comics?
Well, I was never an editor in chief. I was just an editor, but yes, short answer is yes. Now, there was a long period where, I worked at DC Comics for 3 years, and that was the longest 30 years of my life. Not some of it. I mean, it's just very, very, very intense to edit monthly periodical comics for Marvel or DC. And so it was a very, very taxing time, and it really burned me out on editing comics. I will say that for a long time. But I got back. Last year, 2022, I edited some stuff for Z2. I did a Cheech and Chong graphic novel.
Oh, cool.
And I really, really enjoyed it. I think I miss editing comics now, just because it's not I wouldn't do it as my life or death. I wouldn't start a publisher that was, Heidi's Comics or whatever, but I don't mind taking on a project here and there, because there's so many great creators now. There's so many wonderful, wonderful people, and getting to work with them is just, wonderful. I mean, it's the best part of comics is getting to work with so many creative people. And so, I'm at a point now where I could just respect the process and it not be this matter of life and death, which it was when I worked at DC. So
I guess for the layman out there, like what is the noticeable or major differences between being an editor in chief at for Comics Beat and covering comic news and interviews versus being an editor for a comic publisher? Like, is there any overlap, or just is it completely different worlds?
I would say, aside from having to have a good knowledge of grammar, there's almost nothing in common. And when you're a journalist, I mean, you have to have good grammar. You have to have an ability to find salient facts, be able to back them up, be able to research. Also, I mean, for what the Beat does as a daily website, you have to have a kind of an idea for what is newsworthy. You have to be able to, write good headlines. You have to have some knowledge of what the reader's going to want to see, or, how to get readers to read stuff. Working with publicists and challenging, that. But it's not that different from being a journalist in any other field. You could do it. So as a comic book editor, as a comics editor, a graphic novel editor, is a really, really, really unique skill set. And you need to, whenever people ask me about how to, breaking in as an editor, I say, you got to understand, this job is probably 50% psychiatrist, 30%
wow.
story editor, and 20% project manager. And a lot of people think it's like 50% story editor and 20% psychiatrist. In fact, one of my, I don't want to say the word proteges, but just somebody who I really watched. I don't have any proteges, but somebody who I really watched and grow through the industry, and is now a very successful editor. And when I first told them that, they kind of were like, really? I don't think so. And now they're like, you were 100% right, Heidi.
Wow.
So,
where's the psychiatrist part come in? Is it just like
Look,
Oh,
go on.
is it just dealing? You know what they say. Thinking about this Erica Badu quote when she talks about being an artist, and she says, I'm an artist. I'm sensitive about my shit. Is that where the psychiatrist part comes in? Is just dealing with creative people and just the emotions they have regarding their work and stuff.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
People are very, very sensitive about their work. And in the case of certainly, I will say that the psychiatrist, that just being a people manager, when I
Hmm.
say psychiatrist, I just mean a people manager. I might be even more exacerbated again for the periodical comics industry, because you get into, I mean, there's fewer and fewer monthly comics that have a team that goes on for years. But when you
Yeah.
do get into that, it's a real marriage. It's a real relationship in that you are talking to this person month in and month out, and you um it's just it's a very it's a very ongoing relationship. And especially just in terms of deadlines, you need to be able to understand what a person can do and what a person can't do, and it's the whole team. It's the whole
Yeah.
I mean, the production schedule of comics has changed a lot since I was, now, it's all digital. In my day, you had to wait for the FedEx to come, as crazy as that sounds. But, it's just like deadlines. What are people capable of? Everybody burns out,
Hmm.
everyone burns out on repetitive tasks. And I think just the people manager comes in for graphic novels when you're working on a project that is 120 pages or 160 pages. I mean, that's going to be at least a year of a
Wow.
person's life. Sometimes it's a lot longer than a year. So again, you're developing, sometimes you just send people off and they just do the work. But other people really need to have someone to bounce ideas off, or to have that. Some people want the check-in, believe it or not. Some people really want an editor to check in on them.
Yeah.
So I just and sometimes you don't. I mean, it's not like you want to be the busybody. I actually know some editors who were busybodies, and their creators came to really resent the fact that they were always hanging out and talking to them, and wanted to be their buddy. So that's what I'm saying. It's like every relationship is different. Every
Yeah.
creative process is different. Every cartoonist, every writer, every artist has a different creative process. And as the editor, you must figure out how to create an environment where they can do their best work and feel secure, feel confident about it.
Wow. Very well said. And I guess when you consider all of the different creative teams in your time, working as an editor for Disney, Z2, and DC, is there any one, whether it be creative team or project, that maybe taught you something, or just stands out and in your mind, or you've got maybe a sentimental attachment to, like? I
um,
like the laugh.
well, there's a lot of lessons you learn. Of course, I
Hmm.
loved working with Brian K. Vaughan and Pia Guerra on Why the Last Man. And I loved working with Brian. I worked with him on Swamp Thing before that. And I like to think we had a really great relationship. And so that was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun because I don't think an editor should be a really overbearing presence for any creator. I think your job is to let that creator do their best work,
Hmm.
not tell the story that you want them to tell. And, I think Brian was a very talented writer, and it was a pleasure. There's another person I worked with, and back in the day at Disney, and now I'm forgetting what he wrote. I think he wrote Pepper Ann for me. Remember Pepper Ann? I don't know how old you are, but surely some listeners out there are old enough to remember these 90s cartoons like Pepper Ann. And that was Scott Gimple, who went
Oh
on
my God.
now.
I'm sorry for interrupting. Pepper Ann was my shit as a kid. I'm 34 years old. So this
Right,
was
you're
like
right there.
prime years to watch this
Mhm.
on Disney Plus after, or not Disney Plus, sorry. Disney, like the channel, the cable channel after school. No, Pepper Ann was the shit. Yeah.
Right,
She
right.
was
It
my,
was so good.
yeah.
Recess, right? Recess. That
Oh,
was my favorite.
Recess.
Oh,
Recess is like
so good.
what it might be my favorite cartoon of all time. Like Hustler Kid,
Oh,
You know, like that's what I envisioned. You know, like my school life was supposed to be. It was clearly not that at all. But wait, did you have a hand in recess at all?
I mean, I didn't. I mean, we did the comics.
Oh
I mean, I
wow.
loved it. Oh my god,
Oh
the
wow.
minute I got the Bible for
Spinelli.
Lisa's, oh,
Yeah,
Spinelli was my favorite. I
she was
just
cool.
adored her. I believe wasn't it
Yeah,
Pam Segal who did her voice?
I
I
believe
think.
so. Let me look it up.
Yeah, because then Pam Segal had been. Well, you know what? That's
Eh,
one of my.
Pamela Adlon.
Yeah, that's the same person.
Okay, okay.
Pam Siegel Adlon. Pamela Adlon is the same person. That's my holy grail interview because I'll tell you
Oh, that's
why.
cool.
It's like
That
way back in the day. I worked for her aunt, Lynn
hmm.
Siegel, at the Hollywood Reporter, and Pam was just this kid. I mean, literally just a kid who would come into the office all the time. And I mean, I'm sure she doesn't remember me at all, but uh, I would love to be, I was just like, oh, she's coming in and she's hanging out and she's kind of annoying us while we work. And then I was like, oh, she became a voice actor. And then I was like, Spinelli. Oh, she did Spinelli. This is so cool.
Oh, wow,
So
that's cool.
I was actually advocating then to try to get an interview, but I never could.
Hmm.
So now, of course, she's so successful with Emmys. That's really, again, I love seeing people go on and be successful. But yes, Recess, Pepper Ann. So I was going to say with Pepper Ann, this guy, Scott Gimple, wrote some stories. And so he was great. I mean, he wrote some of the best scripts I've ever seen. It was just an amazing working with him. He was so talented, such a good writer. And then it's so funny because I moved away. I was living in LA and then I moved to New York. And would come back to LA like a couple times a year. And I would, call up writers and take them to lunch. And so I took Scott to lunch at this really fancy sushi place that's still the best sushi I ever had. And one of the Olsen twins was like right next to us. I guess this was a celebrity hangout and we didn't know it. So it was just really funny. Anyway, so Scott has gone on to be the showrunner for The Walking Dead.
Oh, wow.
And like he's the whole head of the whole Walking Dead empire, right? And so I'm not surprised because he's really great. I guess he would be the other, holy grail for me too. And I've actually tried to interview him several times, but I've never managed to get through. And which is funny because Robert Kirkman I've known forever.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I've interviewed him several times, and I love talking to Robert. Don't get me wrong; it's great, and I see him at the con, and he says hi. So which is nice. It's nice that he remembers the little people, But I would love to. I would love, these Disney Adventures years. I mean, I told you, I just talked to Greg Weisman, who's he really is the creator of the Gargoyles legend, the custodian of the Gargoyles. And so it was really great. I hadn't talked to him in 30 years. So he was on my bucket list. It's nice, 25 years later, almost 30 years later, to circle back to some of these projects and see where everybody went to and where everybody, ended up and myself included, I guess.
Wow. Heidi, you brought up burnout, and I was curious how you avoid burnout, and maybe specifically, like, how do you keep things fresh? Having worked in comics, like you said, for more than 20 years, like how do you keep it fresh for yourself? I was looking through your Twitter, and not surprisingly, you keep you keep your finger on the pulse of a lot of pop culture. You brought up Travis and Taylor. I think you also retweeted something about Andre 3000's Flute album, like. I guess in addition to that, sorry for the compound question, like what else are you into?
Well, I mean, I'm definitely into baseball. I mean, that is my great weakness is baseball. My great pastime is baseball, just because it completely. I love the Mets. I'm a Mets fan, and we have the best announcers. And it's funny when you said what I was talking earlier about repeating myself. It's like you listen to these guys; they do 162 games. I mean, they like Gary, Keith, and Ron. Sometimes, well, they don't do all 162, but Gary does 130 games, and Keith does 90 games. Ron does 90 games. How the games are 2.5 hours long, and yet they never repeat themselves.
I've really gotten into lately watching, watching sports, like more than I've ever had in my life. And as someone who's been podcasting for, going on 12, 13 years now, I really focus in on, like the sports center, but like you just mentioned, like sportscasters, because I do find it remarkable how they keep the energy going, like, how they keep it fresh. And it is impressive when you hear that stat, 160, games a year.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, man, like imagine having to do that.
Well, I think one of the reasons is that they have a producer and they have somebody listening.
It
And
would be
so,
nice to have one. Yeah,
right.
that is a
And
good
so I
point.
think when the producer listens, they are like Keith, especially Keith Hernandez, like Keith, you already told that story or something like that, right? But there's actually like yeah, I mean, so I love baseball. I mean, I love wrestling. I love Pokemon Go. Like wrestling and Pokemon Go were my two big go-tos during the early pandemic when we were
Really
all
quick, I got to jump in on this because
yeah.
I love me some Pokemon. Who are your starters? What's your lineup looking like for Pokemon Go?
Oh, well, my starters or you mean in terms of what? In terms of
Your
my
squad. Well, I guess in Pokemon Go you only get one set Pokemon. Yeah, I
well,
guess.
you do. I mean, I love the new one. I'll tell you, I love Florigato. Okay,
Okay.
these are the new Paldean ones that were just introduced. Florigato is like, I love cats, so it's a flower cat, and the animation on it is incredible. It's so good.
All right.
I've had Florigato as my buddy for quite a
Love to see it.
while, and when you give him a candy, like he wipes his mouth, it's so cool. I love Florigato, and so
Oh my God,
yeah,
this is a really cute ass grass type.
right.
Yeah. Wow, this
It's
Pokemon is it's
so
pretty cool looking.
cute.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I like the Paldea ones. So yeah.
Okay.
But
So.
but just to go back to burnout. I mean, of course you get tired. I mean, I've been been doing this blog for 20 years, and it ebbs and flows, absolutely. But again, you see something new come along, and new people, or this people you like at different positions or doing different things, and then you're just. I mean, how long have you been doing this podcast?
Since 2012.
Right. So a long time, 11
Yeah.
years. And you always find something to say. Even sometimes I'm sure you're less into it or more into it. But
Oh
at
my
the end
God.
of the day, it's fun to talk to people.
Oh
Right?
yeah. Yeah. It's fun to hear my own voice. That's what you're saying.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. I never get tired. I never get tired.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jokes aside, I do find, like talking to folks like you or David Harper and, like other people that really love this medium or the creators and getting like an insight does keep it refreshing for me. Even if sometimes like, my reading falls by the wayside, it is nice to still be involved, and put like something back into it as well, like to contribute to this thing I love with these interviews and insights, Yeah, I can only imagine. Yeah, I'm sure for you, it's, the same thing as well. Sometimes getting that nugget or that perspective from someone, is like, it reminds you of why you do it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And new people come and have new ideas. I mean, I've seen, you said but 20 years. I've been doing the beat for 20 years. I've been doing comics a lot longer than 20 years. It's closer to 40 years.
Oh,
So I've seen a lot of changes. I've seen a lot of changes in attitudes, and I've seen, a lot of things that when I got into the industry, I felt needed to change. And I've been able to see those changes made. So that's really the best feeling.
What are some of
I
those?
mean,
What are some of those big significant changes that you've
oh,
seen?
well, there's two. Well, there's three, but
Okay.
I'll go with the one. Okay, first off, I was always into graphic novels. I was always pro graphic novel because I loved the long storylines in comics, right? And I loved things like the Avengers Defenders War. I went back and got all those, right? Or what was another one that I was Jim Shooter. He was so good he had this whole the was it the Beyonder saga or something? But then George Perez dropped out of it after.
Yeah,
No. It was another. It got.
Oh my God. Okay. Damn. Yeah.
Yeah,
I feel like you just unlocked the memory.
Avengers, and it got all messed up because George Perez was supposed to draw it, and then I don't know why he left, but he only drew like the first 4 issues.
Wait,
So
it's not Infinity Gauntlet, is it? Because I think that was the one.
No. It's not a lot longer anyway.
Okay.
But I love these long storylines, and And then I would be like, oh, this is really how you should read these comics, is like, I would love to save them up. And then when I had the
Hmm.
whole story was finished, I'd go and I'd find a comfy spot and I'd read the whole story. So I knew the graphic novel was eventually going to be the way. And I didn't want to kill the periodical by any means, but I felt like the graphic novel should be recognized as a valid form for storytelling. And of course, now it's the prevalent form. And there's a lot of is the pamphlet doomed talk, which there's been since I got into this industry. That's been that way for 40 years.
Hmm.
And then, so the other thing, which is really the big one, is that when I got into comics, to have a woman reading comics, let alone making comics, was so unheard of and such a battle and such a struggle. And so many times I was told women don't like comics because they're not visual, or they don't like superheroes, or they don't like action, or they don't like this, or they don't like that, or some other stupid shit. And now it's the reality of it is that there was a period where women didn't read comics, and that is the 80s and 90s. And I say women, I mean women and girls, because it was Trina Robbins, who was the great advocate for women in comics, who found all these statistics from the 50s that were publishers, like marketing research that they had done and that they published in like the Magazines Association of America. It's very, very dry, very just numbers sort of stuff, and that showed that the audience was half boys and half girls for comics in the 50s. So this was pretty groundbreaking, shocking news. And we would go up to publishers and shake this in their face, the male publishers of the day. And it wasn't we didn't become more popular because of that. I'll leave it at that. But it was, I was told by everybody, by all the powerful people in comics, that women just wouldn't read comics, and they just, it never could be done. How do we do it? How do we do it? How do we do it? Well, you just make things that are accessible to women and girls. And of course, now it's, the manga revolution. Obviously, manga is insanely popular. I mean, I don't know what the breakdown of readership is, but it's probably 50-50. But there's seinen and there's shonen, and there's shoujo, there's shonen. I mean, there's books that girls like, there's books that boys like, there's books that boys and girls like. So it's just, I mean, that was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard. It's like, when you're standing there being a big comics nerd, and then you're told that you're the only one of your kind, or you're weird because you read comics. It just, for me, that created a big "I'll show you" attitude, and I guess I was right. The other one was that kids couldn't read comics, but that one wasn't so much the kids didn't like comics, as no one would be that stupid as to say that kids didn't like comics, but it would be more like they didn't want kids reading their comics, which I can sort of understand. But that was also there was that period of the 80s and 90s when kids comics were really failing, and a lot of reasons for that. So, but yeah, I was right about all three of those.
Get it, Heidi. All right. I want to go back to your second point, because you mentioned it in this recent article that you wrote, which is titled "Retailer Warns That Comics Are Dying Again." Yeah. It was published on November 9th. But in it, you have a line where you say that you've been writing about the decline of periodical comics here on the beat endlessly for the last 20 years. And I guess why does it feel so much louder now? Is it just because we're living in an age of social media and sometimes the echo chamber effect? Like, I guess just to put it bluntly and just to bluntly ask, like, is there any legs to the the rhetoric that we're hearing about comics dying? Like, are they really dying?
Well, if you say comics are dying, that's just dumb. Comics will never die. Okay, like they didn't die. This is again one of my primal moments. I quoted it over and over and over again. But I was on a panel with Walt Simonson, Louise Simonson, and Chris Claremont, and they were just talking about all the great books they did, like the Thor, Walt Simonson's run on Thor. And he said at that point, He was like, we all thought comics were going to die in a year anyway. So we were just like, why don't we just do what we want to do? So this was like the 70s, and he's not wrong. Everyone, you can go back to the fanzines, the letter columns that are printed, and see everybody's like, comics are dying, this is over, this is not going to work, comic shops are closing. It's the same sort of doom and gloom. In the 90s, obviously, there was a huge implosion of the industry. That was not a lie. It was, and comics are dying. These publishers are dying, but they didn't. They stuck around. They soldiered on. Somehow they made it through. It is literally a characteristic of people in the comics industry since I started 40 years ago. I mean, before that, when I was a fan, growing up, comics are going to die. Now, what they mean is this aspect of comics that I like and I work in is having trouble, right? But comics are never going to die. That's like saying movies are going to die or books are going to die. That's like saying French fries are going to die. I mean, this is not like that. People like salty starch. They're always going to find some way to eat salty potatoes, So,
but I guess, is there any legs to any of it? Whether it be, so what are some of the valid points that you could point to that you could say, yeah, there is a decline now in the American comic market? Is it the overprice or the lack of diverse storytelling? Like what has legs?
So I think the number one problem right now in the comics industry is that we don't have sales charts. And if we did have sales charts, everyone was like, oh, it would show how bad the numbers are. It's like, maybe it would, but it would also show that some comic is the number one comic. In the 90s, things got very bad. The number one comic sold 75,000 copies. And, the numbers were very low, and we survived. So I think the lack of sales charts, so everybody's just guessing. That's the thing. All of these people who say they don't know jack shit. Okay. They don't know what the numbers are. They might know what their numbers are, but they don't know what anybody else's numbers are. So we don't know. We don't know how bad sales are. We don't know how good sales are. Okay. So that's the number one cause of this kind of really sharp anxiety. Okay. Now,
that's a good word for it.
Right. So there's a lot of anxiety, which I think there's a lot of anxiety about everything right now. There's a lot of anxiety about the economy, about the world, about the climate, about politics, everything. We are right now living in an incredibly anxious, negative time. And, I mentioned Taylor and Travis because it seems like, as fake as it is, one of the few kind of positives that we can look at and be like, oh, aren't they cute? So there's a lot of anxiety. Now, some of it is justified. And I do think, but I think it's the narrative is clouded by bad actors who are trading on the anxiety in order to sell their own products. And Mark Millar, I challenge you, right? And it's just like, he's coming out. I'm sorry, I am Scottish, so I'm going to do the Scottish accent, and he's like, oh, I wish we could get all the old timers working on the comics again. And like, Mark, you are an old timer. You're just talking about yourself. You want to be doing your Superman, and that's fine. Own it, my friend. You did great. Red Sun, that is great. You did some really good Superman stuff. I'd love to see you come back on Superman. Okay. But I mean, it's very self-serving of a Mark Millar. It's like, oh, what about John Byrne? No one wants to see John Byrne on comics now. They don't. Old people do. You need to. So the problem is that there's not a lot of inspiration in what is being done at Marvel and DC. And those are the drivers for a lot of comic shops. Okay. Frank Miller was 22 years old when he did Daredevil.
Wow.
22 years old. Okay. I think he was under 30 when he was under 30 when he did Dark Knight. He was a kid. Um, he was a kid. Now, John Byrne is not a kid, right? Mark Miller is not a kid. I mean, Alan Moore was barely 30 when he did his stuff. And they all started when they were teenagers also. I mean, Stan and Jack were around 40 when they redid the Marvel Universe. So I'm not saying you have to be, I'm not saying that there's not room for super old people, which 40 isn't super old, but for today's purposes, it is considered old. But they were able to reinvent, and the people who did do Marvel were not kids. So that is true. Okay. But they hadn't already created a superhero universe. Kirby had been doing romance comics, right? So, I mean, I just think, I can't fault the editors necessarily. It's just that Marvel and DC have become cogs in these giant corporations. I mean, look at everything going on with the MCU this week. Look at everything going on with Warner Brothers Discovery this week with these characters, with these look at this whole controversy with David Zaslav and killing the movies. And then this time, he had this Wile E. Coyote movie that everybody loved and was burying it. Mm-hmm. And even he had to back down. This time it was like the outcry was so high. So, but I mean, you're just, there's, and then, like the MCU just pulled back on the Kang, this whole Kang. And you know what? Thank God. Because I'll tell you, after seeing Quantumania and the Marvels is much better than Quantumania, right? But it's like, it's so obvious that the people at the MCU have ideas, but they don't have stories.
Yeah, we talked about the Marvel. Hell, these last two episodes, it feels like I've said the MCU like a million times at this point. But I think at the end of the day, our final thoughts was like all roads lead to like better storytelling. Like the lack of strong scripts or even just basic scripts and good storytelling is obviously missing, and we're seeing the impact on that. But and I wanted to go back to your point about like Mark Millar's comments about bringing in some of this old talent, and like I see where he's going, but at the same time I think I'm in the same boat as you where like you can't rely on nostalgia to revive or keep like especially like superhero comics. I think any comic shop that is only focusing on being a weekly superhero comic book store and only catering to nostalgia and older readers just won't last. Like it's you gotta. I think there's a fine middle ground that we can land on, and I can't take credit for this. I'll take credit to whoever the poster was in the comment section of your article, but they brought up a good point about how like the Bruce Timm verse is so widely regarded and respected by older fans, and also like was in my case like was used to bring me into like DC and things. I think there's a fine middle ground that we can tell that intelligent storytelling can be done about superheroes where it can appeal to like both like multiple generations. If we're talking, if we're trying to bring in younger readers into like the big two, I think there's a fine middle ground there, and it's not okay.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And Bruce Timm, you're right. That was a great thing to bring up because first off, that was a dark time, for the comics industry. The 90s were a dark time. And we might look back on this. I think we will look back on this as a dark time for the big two for sure. And it was so well done. Like Bruce Timm was such a great designer, and Paul Dini was a very good writer, and they created this super classic look. But I mean, there was another piece I wrote where I went to Toy Fair back in the end of September, a couple months ago, and it was all manga and anime, and like there was no superhero stuff. But every once in a while, you'd go in and there'd be like a row of cold cast statues, and there'd be like Spy by Family and One Piece, and then there'd be Batman the animated series. There'd be this 30-year-old Bruce Timm statue, and I'm like, really? Well, it's the best looking one for sure, but it's 30 years old. So really, have we not updated anything? So they just have to take chances. I mean, Mark Miller is right. He is right about that. They have to take chances. And it's so dangerous to take chances at Marvel or DC right now, you know? And I mean, Denny O'Neil took a chance on this 22-year-old kid, you know, on Daredevil. And it changed comics. I mean, you know, they took a chance on, I mean, the Vertigo, all those English invasion guys who came in, I mean, they all completely upended the characters. They tore them apart and built them back up again. Neil Gaiman, Alan Moore, Peter Milligan, all of them, you know? And then they created new characters like, you know, Hellblazer. I mean, look what Alan Moore did for Swamp Thing. Good Lord. You know? So, I mean, in some ways, that revolution has happened. You know, like you can't really come in and be dark and gritty again with superhero, you know? I mean, that's been done. We did dark and gritty. So, so what is, you know, and I don't know. I don't know. I mean, do you turn, I mean, Batman into One Piece? Or do you turn Spider-Man into Lore Olympus? I mean, I'm not sure. It's never going to be a bunch of people, corporate people sitting in a room being like, oh, how do we innovate? You know, it's just going to be some kid walking in with their portfolio that she shows and it knocks everyone's socks off.
Well said. Yeah, we're definitely overdue a revelation in that regard. But you made a comment about the Toy Fair experience, and I think you echoed that at the New York Comic Con. At the New York Comic Con panel with David Harper and Chris Arendt, and it was so profound that I had written it down, and you had said something to the effect of like, you can, if you walk outside right now onto the convention floor, you're going to see a giant Luffy and you're going to see a giant Goku, but you won't see a giant Batman or a giant Spider-Man. And it got me thinking, you know, once you said that, I was like, oh, that perfectly encapsulates what I felt was missing. And I couldn't put it into words until you had said it. I'm like, oh, because it feels like it's a giant manga anime convention. No disrespect to any of those. I, you know, thoroughly love manga and anime, but it got me thinking, like, is it really bad? I mean, is it truly bad that manga and anime are dominating? Is that like my, you know, American nationalism like coming into play, not wanting to see, you know, like another, you know, a form of comic books from another country like dominate? Like is it truly bad that manga is like on top? You know, like you would kind of hope that it would force American comics to innovate or maybe see what's working.
Okay, so, you know, if somebody, you know, 5 years ago, somebody comes up, and 10 years ago, actually, is more like it. And they're like, oh, look, BuzzFeed is #1, right? With these headlines, these user-generated content, and, you know, you'll never believe that, you know, what was in the basement. And so you're like, oh, I guess that's what I got to do now, right? I got to change how I do my headlines. And, you know, so you know, just as a journalist, but then you're also like, you know, a good story is a good story. I mean, there can be certain stunts on the internet that get more people to click, and, you know, and then Google comes along and ruins it all. So, you know, nothing lasts forever. But I think, look, let's just take One Piece as an example, which is probably one of the greatest comics of all time. I mean, it is. It's one of the top 10 greatest comics of all time, right?
Fair to say, for sure.
And one of the best-selling, one of the most popular, and it's incredibly popular in Japan. It's incredibly popular all over the world. Now let's look at what One Piece has. What makes it a great comic? Okay, it has incredible characters who are motivated. You know, it has great character designs that are truly memorable and stand out. You know, and most important of all, it has one creator who is guiding the storyline for more than 100 volumes. And he hasn't, I think he said there's going to be an end to it at some point, but he said he's telling his story, you know? And you just don't have that in big two comics anymore. You just don't, you know? I mean, Tom King obviously has been getting to do a lot of his own stories, and that's fantastic. You know, he's a good writer. He does good stories, you know, but it's not like Tom King has, I mean, maybe maybe he could do it, but I mean, he's not doing One Piece, you know, he's not telling a compelling story that lasts more than a decade,
Yeah.
right? And just American comics. I mean, they don't even have here's my story for 12 issues,
Hmm.
right? It's like, oh, it's 6 issues or 4 issues, right? They have these miniseries, and guess what? Those are graphic novels. They're just serialized. And I understand serialization is another monetization. That's great. Good. Go with God. But I mean, how are you going to bring in new readers with something exciting? How are you going to do that? How are you going to excite those kids who did like the MCU, and did like One Piece, right? Except the thing is, the MCU, I know we talked about it a million times, but here's my little thing. It's already 15 years old. When I was at Anime Expo or Anime NYC, which is this weekend as we're recording this, last year, I saw some teenagers and they were like, yeah, my mom likes Marvel. She likes Captain America. So those, people who were like teenagers, late teens, when they went to see Iron Man, Captain America, the first Avengers movie, they're grown up now. They have kids. It's not, it's not the fresh new face on the
That's
block at
fair. Yeah.
all. Yeah. So, that's it. People are ready for something. What do you think Barbie did so well? I mean, even though Barbie dolls have been around, it was new, it was
Yeah.
fresh. So they've got to it's not the latest guy from, Joe Prado's studio, as talented as they are working on some superhero.
Hmm.
It's not.
It sounds like you would probably agree that I don't think the big two. I don't think putting all your eggs in the basket of like the big two to save the industry is quite the answer. I think it'll come from some of these independent and smaller publishers
Mhm.
that are capable of doing fresh new things because they're not beholden to IPs and corporate stakeholders and things like that. And and if you do agree, like I want to hear who are some publishers in your eyes that are doing fresh things that are putting out really cool stuff in the world of comics, like refreshing things.
Sure, sure. Well, who I really am excited to see what they do right now is Oni, and I just feel like they rebooted. And look, they had a really bad 2 years, where they fired their whole staff, and that's awful. And that because there were some pretty good people there who put out some pretty good books, but they brought on new people, and they seem to be um I mean, I interviewed the publisher there, Hunter Goranson, and the editor in chief, Sierra Hun, and they were like, "Oh yeah, if you don't make the art the main thing in a comic book, why are we even here?"
Hmm.
And a lot of publishers don't do that. It's like the writer is the biggest name on the cover these days, and
Interesting.
right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
it's like who's the hottest artist in comics aside from Daniel Warren Johnston?
Damn, that's a good question. Now I'm on the spot. I would say, yeah, my mind immediately always tends to go to Daniel Warren Johnson, but you're right. As far as like being able to list off rapid fire, I'm thinking like Jorge Jimenez, like Gary Frank, but maybe that's more of my personal bias coming in.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah,
I
but
don't know if that's,
I mean, they're great. I mean, look, I'll just say, I mean, Gary's really good. I mean, he's also been around a long time too.
but
I
you're
mean, it's
saying like some, like objective, kind of like across the board, like who are the biggest draws art wise, and yeah, I guess if I had more time, maybe I'd think of names. But to your point, like yeah, it's not very easy to name off the top of the head.
right. So
Hmm.
I'll give Skybound credit for putting Daniel Warren Johnson on
Oh yeah,
Transformers,
Transformers.
which turns out, I mean, they seem to be selling quite a few books, so I'm happy
Hmm.
about that, right? And that might be the number one book. I mean, we don't know because we don't have sales charts. But yeah, it's just I mean, and that's on purpose. I mean, that
Hmm.
was after the Image guys broke away in the 90s, both Marvel and DC both. They said, we're never going to let the artists
Yeah,
become huge again. We're never
that's
going to let that happen. And they never did,
hmm.
And I just think it's harder for, um, yeah, I just think it's harder now for an artist to really break out. And I think part of it is just that we're exposed to so much visual stimulation
Hmm.
on a daily basis from everything.
That's fair.
It's not like, when Neil Adams came on the scene and just revolutionized everything. I mean,
Yeah, that's a
it
good
was
point.
the, yeah.
How do you and you brought up so far for the, you've really emphasized like the lack of sales data. And am I crazy for thinking there was a time where you could go on a site like Comic-Con and look at the sales data? Is it because like all of these publishers have splintered,
Mhm.
Penguin House and Lunar and all
Mhm.
that? Is that why we've kind of
Yes.
lost? Okay, so it is exactly that.
Yeah. I mean,
Hmm.
they don't give any data. Lunar
Wow.
and Penguin Random House don't put out any data. Now there is a movement to try to listen. If I run into a publisher, and I mean like, the top name on the masthead, and I just say to them, "Do you want sales charts back?" They're like, "Yes, we
Wow.
really want them to come back."
Hmm.
So it's not just me. They want them back for these reasons that we're saying. So there is a movement to try to to try and bring them back.
Wow.
But there's a lot of trust issues out there,
Hmm.
I guess. So, but
Interesting.
we will get them. We absolutely are going to get sales charts back. It just has to happen. So,
I got faith. All right. Heidi, I want to pivot back to the beat, and I was looking as someone that visits that site pretty frequently. I'll admit, prior to doing my research and prepping for this, I was maybe not familiar with how long the beat has been around. And then I got into a rabbit hole. Actually, it wasn't even a rabbit hole. It was just your
mm,
Wikipedia that broke down like the history of the beat. And I've got a question for you, considering that the beat starts in 2004 on Comic Con, and then moves to Publishers Weekly in 2006, and then it went independent in 2010, and then in 2016 it moved again, and then it got acquired by Lion Forge in 2017, and then went back to being independent in 2020. I would say that a less resilient person probably would have quit after the third or fourth move. But what kept you going throughout all of those changes and throughout those years? And what does like the beat represent in today's day and age where it feels like anyone can get online and share their feelings and thoughts and quote unquote break news? Like
mm.
what kept you going? What does the beat represent in today's day and age?
Well, I'll tell you what kept me going, and it's very simple. Always bet on yourself.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
no one is ever going to care about you and your work as much as you do. And so I realized that there was some value in what I did and that no one else was bringing the specific. I mean, other people could do different things, and I mean, I would feel threatened sometimes by new sites that came along. And then after I analyzed, some of them were more successful or better in some ways than the beat. But after I analyzed it, I realized, they don't do what I do and I don't do what they do. So it's fine. Right. Um, so that's it really. I mean, I love comics, and I want comics to succeed, and I want them to be better, and I want creators to be more successful. I want them to be able to make more money doing it. I want everybody to be able to be successful in this industry, and I feel that giving them good information
Hmm.
and that they might not have access to otherwise is beneficial to that. And I feel like readers want to have that same thing. So that's it. It's mission driven. That's one thing I've actually come to realize over the last few years, because when you read out like that, all the changes, you're right. It is. What was I thinking? So it's very mission driven. And,
Hmm.
I've been doing, next year will be my 20th anniversary. I'm going to say after I can do it every day for 20 years, we'll see. I mean, I'll probably keep doing it, but I can also be like, you know what? I did this.
Yeah.
So, and what was your other question?
No, well, the other question was, what does the beat represent in today's day and age when it feels like anyone can, break the
Oh,
news or share their opinion?
well, can they?
Mm.
I mean, when I first started, there was a blogosphere, and there was a lot of other really good writers like Tom Spurgeon and Kevin Melrose and Johnny Bacardi. I mean, I still have my blog roll. I've never gotten rid of my blog roll. I still have it archived. And people would quote them all the time. People shoot, and then there would be like blog controversies. One person would say, people they all dumped on me. Apparently, there was a club that all the bloggers were on, but they didn't invite me for whatever
Hmm.
reason. Yeah, maybe you could figure that one out. But yeah, there was kind of this robust dialogue going on that was replaced by social media. But because social media has become so decrepit now and corrupted, corrupted in the way that a computer file becomes corrupted. Actually, I hear people saying blogs are going to come back. So
Hmm.
that might be the next thing because newsletters came back, message boards came back. So all these
It
forms of
really is
communication.
all cyclical, isn't it? Huh.
It is,
Wow.
and then we introduce new things like podcasts and YouTube. So what does it represent? I mean, I hope that we try to be accurate. We try to be informative. We try to be fun. We try to be entertaining. I'm lucky to have a lot of really great writers who work with me who are also on board with this mission, like Zach Quaintance and Avery Kaplan and um, boy, who I'm forgetting all my really awesome
Joe Grunenwald.
Joe Gerd. Although Joe said stepped back,
Okay.
he was our managing editor, but he had to step back. Just he had been doing it for a long time,
Yep.
and you can't do it that long. But Gene Simons, and we're bringing out some new people. We just got a whole bunch of writers about manga and anime,
Awesome.
and they're doing a fantastic job. So that's it. Just seeing new people come in and become excited about things that keeps me excited.
That's awesome.
I enjoy life, Badr. I like life, and it's good. It's good to be alive.
I totally agree with that. I had texted. I've got a little text group with Chris Hack from the Oblivion Bar podcast and Greg Lichtteig from the First Issue Club, and I was telling them like, "Hey, I've got Heidi coming on the show. I've wanted to get her on for a while." And Greg's most immediate response was like, "Hell yeah!" He was like, "We need more outlets like the Beat and Sketch, like who aren't into sensationalist news that do the legwork of looking up facts and presenting that in a unbiased way." And and I think that was really, and I got to really experience that, or like kind of have that feeling to this week when the news of the Comixology basically going away come December, I think 4th or something like that.
Mhm.
I think my knee-jerk reaction was like, this is why I don't fuck with Comixology, this and that. And it wasn't until I read your write-up where I think it was in a tweet, you had mentioned something like, hey, it's not all that it's cracked up to be. And, I got to reading your article and it was like, yeah, only 7% of what is it, comics or users actually use the Comixology app. Most of them are using Kindle anyways. And, most of that team has moved to the Kindle to improve the reading experience. And it was just a moment of like, man, you got to remind yourself not to just have these, knee-jerk reactions, to look past the headlines. And okay.
Well, that's a good example because obviously I had access to some background
Mm-hmm.
information that I was given access to some background information, and I does it suck? Yes. Does Amazon suck for destroying Comixology? Yes.
All day.
But it isn't quite gone away yet. And I do
Mm-hmm.
think they have not done away with the name Comixology. And this is just how it is. And so yeah, I was trying to just not be alarmist about it. I mean, I'm sure other people, and believe me, I have a couple of my writers working on reviews of the Kindle, and they're going to go nuclear, So I'm like, so it's like we're going to get, a variety of opinions on this. Well, I appreciate,
Got it.
look, I was trying not to carry Amazon's water in that, but I was also just
Mm.
trying to be, look, here are the facts.
Yeah.
This is, the shitification of everything, but let's try to make the best of it as we
Yeah.
can in this moment. So anyway.
I think I could sum up all of my feelings about you in just a couple words, and that's that you keep it real. And I'll never forget when I was sitting in that panel room. I think they were waiting on things to get started. I think you might have been the last one. I think you were running a little late,
No, yeah,
but
yes.
you ran through that door, and you had like a badass leather jacket, and you were double fisting coffee. And you got on stage. You were like, "Do you guys mind if I like eat my breakfast real quick?" And I'm like, "Man, this is real." I was like, I can get behind that. This is a real person right here. And I think it comes across in your writing. Like you're just very level headed and real. And I
Well,
applaud that because it's not easy.
well, I'll tell you also, I've been doing it so long, and I'm at an age where you could just do wacky things like that, and people are like, she's a Tosh, she's doing, let her.
It's
I'm
part of
like,
the charm.
it's like Annie Potts on character on like Young Sheldon, like she's my
Yeah,
role model, really.
that's awesome. All right, Heidi, I got maybe the most difficult question out of all of this line of questions, but considering that you are an author on that book I mentioned at the top, Secret Teachings of a Comic Book Master, The Art of Alfredo Alcala, I want to know what does your Mount Rushmore of comic book artists look like? Like, if you had to think of like 4 comic artists that represent maybe your taste, your personal favorites, like who is on that Mount Rushmore?
Um, well, the Hernandez brothers.
Okay.
Okay. Like I don't know if that counts as 2. They are very
Let's count
different
it as one.
artists,
Let's count it as
but
one.
we'll count them as one. They are the greatest. They are the ones who um just and opened my eyes to this whole world that was
Hmm.
absolutely incredible. I'm a big fan of um old timey kind of stuff. I mean, because I'm old, but this is so not politically correct, but I'm just gonna say it anyway. Okay, I do love Milton Caniff.
Hmm.
And I know he was Orientalist and there was racism. Unfortunately, all of the great cartoonists, except Jack
They've all got.
Kirby, had racism, had racist tropes, right? But I just love the romance and
Hmm.
mystery and danger of his work. Just his drawing. It just had so much atmosphere. I mean, I really, really, really love his stuff. I guess I got to say Carl Barks, also another sort of problematic
Hmm.
fave nowadays. But he was the greatest storyteller. I mean, he influenced Crumb. He influenced all those guys. And I will. I would also say,
You got one more
I
spot. You
mean,
got
I
one more spot.
love Linda Barry. Okay,
Okay.
but her art is a little. But her writing is the greatest writing.
Hmm. Now
Like
I'm not familiar with Linda Berry. Like what has she done?
Well,
School
she
me.
did Ernie Pook's Comique, like Drawn and Quarterly puts her stuff now. And she did this comic strip that ran in the 80s that was called Ernie Pook's Comique, and it was just about her growing up, and like this girl Marlis,
Hmm.
and I mean Linda's part Filipino, so it was like kind of this mixed race, and just growing up, and just the things that happen to kids. And her writing is just insanely um beautiful, and it's a lot like Love and Rockets, I would have to say. When you
Cool.
read those really incredible stories that Gilbert and Jaime both did, where they just show you the character's whole life in a few panels, and just everything that that motivated them, and what their hopes were, and where they failed in like one panel. Like they can both do that, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. Linda can do that too. And
Wow.
just, but I will say, uh, her art she draws in this modern primitive style, but it's still just like the most heartbreaking and
Wow.
emotionally charged. So I guess those would be those. That's still only 3. No, that's 4. That's
Yeah.
4 of my
But if you
Mount
want an
Rushmore.
honorable mention, I mean, look, you're Heidi MacDonald. You get a damn
Oh,
honorable
yeah,
mention.
right. What do I get for, I got to put a modern person on there too. A little more modern, who really is like just a bomb. I'd put Urasawa on there too. Although his
Can
work is that's just my personal, like his stuff is kind of uneven, and not everything is as great, but I think 28th Century Boys is masterpiece. Pluto's great. Monster's
Oh
great.
yeah.
I mean, he's just like an incredible storyteller. So,
Have you have you ever read Master Keaton at all?
I haven't read that, no. But I mean, he's done so many. The one that
Yeah.
I know nobody
He's
likes is Billy Bat, right?
I've never read that one, but I don't know if there is like a bad. I mean, this is the first time I'm hearing like he's got like something less than I guess mid or as the kids would say. But I mean, you've mentioned all of his top hits, right? Like 20th Century
Yeah.
Boys, you can't go wrong with. Pluto obviously has got its own damn adaptation that's fantastic. That is a stellar. Yeah, if that talk about you don't waste. Yeah, I'm sorry, I
Yeah,
don't
but
know
you
where
know
I'm going
what?
with that.
Look, I've told this to people, and I'll say it again. I'll tell you. You know how to save periodical comics in America? You
Oh,
got
hit
to
it.
break in to Marvel and DC, and you put the first volume of 20th Century Boys on everybody's desk. They come in. They come in the for work. They don't
Yeah.
do this. Like neither Marvel nor DC has an office anymore, so this wouldn't work anymore. But back in the day when they did, if you could have somehow broken in and left 21st volume 20th Century Boys on all their desks, everyone would have read it. They would have peed their pants, and then they would have tried to do better.
I've had 20th Century Boys Volume 1 on my nightstand for a minute now, and I think this was the motivation to finally
Okay.
crack that book open. I got maybe two more questions for you,
Okay.
but would you say 20th Century Boys be your pick if you had to give someone one graphic novel to like get them into the medium of comics? And I'm include obviously a manga in that as well, but would you say 20th Century Boys, or do you have another pick?
Well, I think you might do the first 20th Century Boys or the first One Piece.
Oh wow.
Let's be honest, that although he got better, but it's just so like at the end of the first volume, you've met all these characters. Luffy wants to be king of the pirates, and how are you not going to keep reading it, right?
Hmm.
I'll tell you though, if you want to really get someone in,
Yeah, what's your go-to? Do you have a
okay,
go-to?
well, there's two, but
Okay.
they're complete opposites. So one is Smile by Raina Telgemeier, which is about how she falls down and knocks out her teeth, and it's a classic. But everybody has. I was talking about this with some friends over the weekend. Everybody has nightmares about falling and knocking their teeth
Oh my
out, or
God.
losing their teeth, getting hit in the mouth. Right? Everybody's
I mean,
universal.
it's literally happened to me, so this sounds right up
Okay.
my alley.
So there you go. So you actually had it happen to you, right?
Oh
But
yeah.
for those such as myself who are lucky enough not to have had it happen, but to worry about it, this book is what happens when you fall down and knock your teeth out. So, and it's charming, it's wonderful, it's an absolute classic. So nobody's not going to want to read about what happened to this girl when she knocked her teeth out, right? You're not
Yeah.
you're not going to put this book down. And the other one is the exact opposite, but My Friend Dahmer by Durf Back Durf.
Oh
There
my
is
God.
no one who is not going to start to read this book, right?
Yeah.
I went to school with Jeffrey Dahmer, one of America's most notorious mass murderers. And what was he like, right? I mean, it's a bestseller in many languages. It's another classic. It's just, like I said, my go-to was just like, is it? People are going to open that book up, and they might not like the art style or something, but they're going to want to know what happens. And I guess the other one is Watchmen. I mean, which is a little, people are like, well, it's too difficult. I mean, look at how we still quote it constantly.
You're right. It is.
In
It is. It is almost like a cliche. That's how
Mhm.
popular it is. It's a cliche to say it, but
I did it 35 minutes ago.
that is good. And really quick, I want to also give you to transition off this. And I'm assuming it was for another podcast, but just since I brought up podcasts, I gotta give you like even more mad credit. Not like I didn't have like mad respect for you, but when we were trying to figure out how to coordinate this, you were like, "Oh, yeah, I normally record my podcast. Oh, I do a podcast as well. I record on Thursdays." And I was like, "What podcast does she do? Is it the beat related? Is it something else related?" Well, as I'm doing my research on you, I'm like, "Oh, she's still Associated Publishers Weekly. Oh, they have a podcast. Oh my God, they've been doing it since 2011. Oh my God, they're almost 600 episodes in. Like, that's incredible. Like from one podcast to another, I
Yeah.
highly respect. What do you guys talk about on that for
We
anyone that's
talk
not
about
familiar?
comics news. I mean, by the time this comes out, we will have recorded it. So this is our podcast will come out on Monday.
Okay.
Our story list is pretty much the things we've talked about here, comics solid, but we cover business topics. We don't
Okay.
do like,
Like best new
it's
comics
not,
of the week and stuff like that.
no, we don't. We don't. It's always like, what was the news? And we
Okay.
cover it from a business perspective. And I think
cool.
we're pretty much the only podcast that really does it quite the way we do it. So it's nice. I wish we had, you know what, you were going to make me think that we got to promote this podcast more. It should be better known. So, because Calvin and Kate are really great. So,
well, look, you got a new subscriber in me, so I'm going to check it out and I'm going to be sharing it with my friends. The last question for you, Heidi, because I know actually speaking of that,
I got to actually go and prep for my next podcast. I got to drink some water. I'm a little hoarse here.
All right, I got one last question for you, and I want to end it on something inspiring. When you consider that there's probably someone listening right now that wants to write about comics professionally, get into the world of journalism, or just wants to be the next Heidi MacDonald, what advice would you give them? And maybe a piece of advice that you wish you would have gotten as you started out, something that would have benefited you early on in your career.
Well, never write something that you wouldn't say to a person's face. First off, that's a really good rule because, and I mean that in that if you're going to say something, critical, don't want to be the person's friend because they're probably not going to want to be friends with you. So I learned that lesson the hard way. So that's just really a good one. And, don't, but it's a good guideline, like it just keeps you honest and it keeps you, um, in mindful of the human
Yeah.
audience that you have. So,
And maybe like,
uh,
and I'm assuming like, not to put words in your mouth, but also probably empathetic towards the actual people that, put their time, sweat, and tears into this.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that doesn't mean you gotta really, sometimes you gotta be harsh. And
Sure.
I don't like that. I don't like being harsh because I do understand there's some,
Hmm.
there's somebody who's baby boy, or baby girl. Um, but yeah, and the other piece of advice I would just be, and this goes for everything, bet on
Yeah,
yourself. Bet on
I love that.
yourself.
I absolutely love that. Thank you. Heidi, this has been even better than I could have imagined and well worth the time and the technical
Yes.
frustrations we had in the beginning.
Yes. And I'm glad we could do it because we
For
danced
sure.
back and forth for a bit, and then scheduling is always difficult. But I'm so glad I
That
could
it is.
finally do it. So
Yeah. Heidi, I'm gonna have links to your socials. I'm gonna have links to the Beat website, obviously in the show notes. I'll even include a link to the Publishers Weekly podcast so people can subscribe and follow you there. But is there anything else that you want to share? Any closing remarks? Anything you want to plug? I mean, you can. This is the part where you can
well, you
shamelessly
make
plug
sure you
anything.
link to my TikTok because I do TikTok, and I
Oh,
say I shouldn't, but I do.
I'll give you a follow.
So
I'm on there
there
too.
you go. Yeah, and that's where I keep it really real. So.
All right, bet.
All right.
You gotta follow out of me. But with that being said, Heidi, I appreciate you. Thank you so much. I'll let you go now, and I'll catch you around. All right.
All right. Thanks so much. Great being here.